Don't touch the mic. All right. We up and rolling live? Are we live? Okay. Well, very good. Well, good morning to everybody. Good morning mostly to everyone in the foyer, but then also to everyone who is tuning in with us online through Facebook. We understand, maybe you can understand me a little bit better now. We understand the lack of people here due to all the snow. Never thought I would see this much snow in El Paso, but it certainly is a lot, so we're glad that everyone who came was able to make it safe, and everyone who decided not to is able to stay home and be safe. We're just happy everyone's safe and sound. This morning we're going to be continuing our series in rebuilding. We've been discussing rebuilding since the beginning of the year, and we've discussed rebuilding through various different avenues, such as forgiveness or patience. And today, what we're going to be discussing is rebuilding through perseverance. So take a moment and reflect on, to you, when you hear perseverance, what do you think of? Sorry? Holding on. Enduring. Very good. Whenever I think of persevering, I think of hiking. One thing that my dad loves to do is hike. In fact, in Colorado, there are 52 14ers. Then that means mountains that are over 14,000 feet above sea level. And my dad's climbed all of them. And I've climbed right around 10 of them. And for me, there's no better example of perseverance than hiking a 14er. It's just miles and miles of going up. And you can't go fast. You have no choice but to just take it one step at a time. One step at a time. And that's really kind of what perseverance is, holding on and taking it one step at a time. And in the Bible, though we have many great examples of perseverance, one, probably the greatest example of perseverance that comes to my mind is the man Nehemiah. Now, Nehemiah is also considered one of the greatest leaders in the Bible as well. And I think a lot of that is attributed to his perseverance. And so this morning for our class, we're going to be using Nehemiah and various other texts to illustrate perseverance in, especially, ironically, in our rebuilding. And when we think about persevering, when I think of persevering, there's different times we need to persevere. And one of the most obvious times would be during hard times, right? That's when we maybe need to persevere the most, because that's when it's difficult to do that. So let me ask you, what are some, and it could be one-word answers or whatever, what are some examples of difficult times or tough times? Pandemic. Very good. Very close to home right now, right? Very good. What else? Health issues. That's affected all people for all spans of time, right? And some, unfortunately, more than others. Great. Any others? Job-related stress, whether it's work stress or losing a job or having to change jobs, whatever else. Very difficult, very stressful, and very hard, right? Very good. Some other ones I would add to that are divorce, or maybe not divorce per se, but marital issues, loss of a loved one, whether that be a family member or just a close friend or a mentor, whatever else. And one that I believe is exceptionally stressful for us all is probably financial issues. At one point in our life or another, we probably will have or have gone through financial issues, and that really can take over your life, and you really need to persevere and truck through it. Well, here is an example of what Nehemiah was going through. Can everyone read? I hope everyone can read that okay. I put all of our scriptures on the screen, but please feel free to turn to them in your Bible. This will be Nehemiah chapter 1, verses 1 through 4. In other words, the opening of the book of Nehemiah, which reads, "The words of Nehemiah, the son of Hakaliah. Now it happened in the month of Chislev, in the 20th year, as I being Nehemiah, was in Susa, the citadel, that Hanani, one of my brothers, came with certain men from Judah. And I asked him concerning the Jews who escaped, who had survived the exile, concerning Jerusalem. And they said to me, the remnant there in the province who have survived the exile is in great trouble and shame. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down, and its gates are destroyed by fire. As soon as I heard these words, I sat down and wept and mourned for days, and I continued fasting and praying before the God of heaven." Well, just for a little context, if we're not familiar with Nehemiah, Nehemiah lived in Babylon, and he was an Israelite, but he was in Babylon because the nation of Judah, who were part of the Israel nation, well, they had separated, but they were Israelites, due to all of their unfaithfulness and idolatry and sinfulness, they got taken into exile into Babylon. And they were delivered to Babylon by God. And they were there for 70 years, or 7 decades. And after the 70 years, God let them return home. Now, not all of them immediately returned home. This is the case of Nehemiah. But he's asking about his brothers who had gone home to Jerusalem. But what is it that they found in Jerusalem? A burned city. Babylon, whenever they came to take over Judah and take them into exile, they destroyed Jerusalem. But my question for you is, why would broken walls and burnt gates make Nehemiah so upset? It says that he wept for days and fasted and prayed. Why is that such a terrible thing that these gates and walls are torn down? Very good. Yeah, it's God's city. That's where his presence dwelt in Jerusalem. So seeing it in that kind of ruin is terrible and shameful. Very good. What else? Worried for them. Why? Exactly. For their safety, because if you don't, nowadays, we do have borders and things, but we don't have walls. We don't rely on walls like they did in ancient times, right? And so if a city didn't have any walls, it was vulnerable to everyone, not just armies, but bandits and raiders and everything else. So yeah, it's obviously embarrassing and shameful that God's city looks like this, but more practically, they're in danger, right, of being attacked. Very good. But my question to you is, how did Nehemiah address the situation? How did he respond? He prayed. Exactly. He prayed to God. It also mentions that he fasted as well, which is part of prayer when you're dedicating all of your time, even your eating time, to God. Very good. And though we didn't read it, if you'll continue on a little bit, what he does in chapter 2, or maybe a little bit before chapter 2, is he asks the king permission to go and rebuild the walls. So Nehemiah first and foremost prayed to God and asked for his help and his wisdom, but then two, he took action and asked the king if he would be allowed to go rebuild the walls. And the king not only allowed him to, but sent him materials and men for protection, above and beyond, obviously, God's provision. Now, unfortunately, not everyone was happy about the wall being built. Though certainly the inhabitants of Jerusalem were thrilled, there were some who were angry. This is in Nehemiah chapter 4, verses 1 through 3. Nehemiah 4, 1 through 3. When Sanballat heard that we were rebuilding the wall, he became angry and was greatly incensed. He ridiculed the Jews, and in the presence of his associates in the army of Samaria, he said, "What are these feeble Jews doing? Will they restore their wall? Will they offer sacrifice? Will they finish in a day? Can they bring the stones back to life from those heaps of rubble, burned as they are?" Tobiah, the Ammonite, who was at his side, said, "What are they building? Even a fox climbing on it would break down their wall of stones." Well, what these guys, I don't know what else to call them, enemies, I suppose, their first instinct when they saw something they weren't happy with was to mock it, right? They mocked the Israelites. They said, "What's the point of building it? Do you think you're going to build it in a day? Even if you build it, a fox can jump on it and destroy it. Where are you even going to get this rubble?" And that's hard, right? Have you ever been mocked? And my question is, how did Nehemiah and then further the people of God move past this mocking? They turned to God. Very good. And then physically, what did they do after they turned to God? Exactly. Yeah, they themselves rebuilt the wall, meaning they continued to work. They didn't stop. And our $5 word for the day, they persevered, right? They persevered through the trial. But first and foremost, what they did, which is what I want us to note, they trusted in God. They turned to God, and they kept working, despite mockery. And mockery is very, very hard. Let me ask you, what makes, because mockery isn't violent, it doesn't physically restrain us, but what is hard about being mocked? Oh, yeah. Yeah, it plants seeds of doubt into our mind and makes us wonder, can we do it, or why are we even doing it? Great. Very good. What else? Good. I think that's the main one. The other one I would say is it can just break you down to, even if you believe in what you're doing, you don't have the willpower to be able to continue. You know, words can really break people down, and that's why it's so important that we persevere. We persevere through mockery, through the hard time that is mockery. But let's keep reading down a little bit. Oh, yes. No problem. Uh-huh. Well, that's a great question. Let's open it up to the class. What do you guys think about why they're mocking them? Mr. Al? Yeah, exactly. And very practically, what I would add, I do believe that if not Satan himself, one of his minions, if you will, was behind some of that, planting some of those seeds. But maybe practically, we can see that Sanballat was with the armies of Samaria, and Tobiah was an Ammonite, which tells me maybe they were a group of raiders, a group of bandits, maybe warlords, if you will, being that they were from two totally different nations and they were side by side. There's a chance that they, with Jerusalem being uninhabited, they were able to just have it. They were able to do whatever they want. And once the king, who was Cyrus, or Darius, Cyrus took over Babylon and Darius was the governor, once he decreed that the Jews were free to go back, he also provided protection for them, telling them, you're not supposed to mess with them. So they may have been upset about that, and maybe they were still able to mess with them because there was no walls and no one would really know. But if they built the walls, they really couldn't do things like that, right? There's all kinds of applications we can make with that. We can see that even today. People just love to see people stay down sometimes, right? And they don't. Yeah. Exactly. Very good. Very good application. I think that's a great one that I overlooked in my preparation, but I appreciate you bringing out. Perfect. So let's move down. Still in chapter 4. Let's move down to verse 7 now. Verses 7 and 8, which we'll read. Which says, "But when Sanballat, Tobiah, the Arabs, the Ammonites, and the people of Ashdod, who were Philistines, heard that the repairs to Jerusalem's wall had gone ahead," and this is after the mocking, "and that the gaps were being closed, they were very angry. They plotted together to come and fight against Jerusalem and stir trouble against it." So their next step, since they figured, well, words aren't working, mocking's not working, so let's try violence, at least threats of violence. Let's see if that stops them. And for a time, if you continue reading, we can see that, yeah, it kind of worked, right? It did indeed kind of work. But let's take note of what Nehemiah did in verse 14 of chapter 4 still. Nehemiah 4 and verse 14. Which says, "And I looked and arose and said to the nobles, to the officials, and to the rest of the people, 'Do not be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, who is great and awesome, and fight for your brothers and your sons, your daughters and your wives, and your homes.'" Oh, excuse me, I did have that on the screen, but oh well. So, I would say how Nehemiah directed him. He always turns to God, right? And what does he do this time? He doesn't need to turn to God because he still is with him. But what he does is he points the people to God, right? He says, "Do not be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, who is great and awesome." And then what else does he do? After he points them to God, where else does he point them to encourage them? Fight for your family, exactly. Which I would say is reminding them of their goals, remind them of the why they're doing what they're doing, which I think is important for us. And we're all year, this whole new year, so about 6 weeks now, we've been talking about rebuilding, right? But have you asked yourself, why are we rebuilding? Why do we rebuild? Why are we rebuilding our families? Why are we rebuilding our communities? Why are we rebuilding our congregations? Why do we persevere? And this can be for you personally, or generally what you feel is why we rebuild. I, I don't blame you. If you're, oh, sorry.
I think the answer is that because God wants that for you.
Okay.
He wants you to rebuild. He wants you to. My takeaway is you'll find strength every time you face something difficult. If you rebuild, if you get through it, you'll find strength to move on to the next thing. And then ultimately, God's wish is for you to come home to Him, and that's how you get there. Is staying in the game constantly.
Very good. Yeah, I think that's a great reason why we rebuild is because it's God's will. And that's how we live. We live our lives to serve God and submit to His will. Great. Why else are we rebuilding? To help? Very good. Perfect. Yeah, to rebuild for each other and build each other back up so that we can all be as perfect and live a life close to Christ as we can. Great. I agree. What I would add why I feel it's important to rebuild, I know I'm young, I'm 24. I want, in our rebuilding, I want to leave. I know the church will persevere with Christ, but I want to do my part to make sure that, not just for my generation, but for my kids whenever they come along, that they have healthy congregations, they have healthy Christian leaders, so that they can do that for their future generations, that we can persevere not just through our lifetimes, but through all time, however long that is. Very good. So, from all that we've studied from Nehemiah so far, if someone were to ask you, how do we persevere in tough times? What would you answer? What are some things you saw in Nehemiah that we can apply to persevere?
Prayer.
Prayer? Yes, I think that's probably the major one, right? We see Nehemiah do that almost constantly. Perfect. Prayer. What else? Yeah, remember why we're doing it. Keep our goals and our vision in the forefront. Perfect. Anything else? Trust. Good. I think, trusting. After we pray to God, we need to trust that He will fulfill what He's promised. Exactly. And what I would add, what I saw from Nehemiah in chapter 4, verse 14, is encouragement. To encourage each other of not only who God is, but that He not only is the God, awesome and almighty, but more importantly, He's with us. He's chosen to fight for us. And so, no matter what, I believe Paul says, what can separate us? Not angels, not demons, nothing can separate us from His love. So, I believe encouragement is the one I would add. Very good. We are rolling and doing good. But one thing we may not think. We think easy, perseverance, hard times, right? Think of it in exercise, running marathon, whatever. It's hard and you got to keep going. But what happens in the good times? How do we persevere through the good times? Do we need to persevere? Well, let's continue into Nehemiah chapter 5. And while you're turning there, let's consider this question. I'm going to pose this question, and you can tell me if you agree or disagree with this quote. Ease is a greater threat to growth than hardship. Do you agree with that or disagree?
It can be.
Agree. And you say it can be. In what ways do you think it can be?
Because you let down your guard, you relax, you don't
Uh-huh.
You don't trust like you ought to, or like you did with the hard times.
Uh-huh.
It's just that you get in a relaxed mode instead of thanking God, and just and next thing you know, you're back in hardships. And that's the reason why sometimes we have to go through some hardships.
Mm-hmm.
Bring us back to God.
Yeah, excellent. I think you're right. We get complacent, maybe even lazy. I agree. In my opinion, I have a harder time in good times, like being faithful and being like just really persevering than I do in hard times. Because in hard times, I feel the pressure. I know I need God. In good times, sometimes I feel like I can handle it. I got it. I got everything I need. I can, and I just think, I'd rather do this than pray. When in hard times, I know I need to pray. Good. So that kind of is what happens to the Israelites or the people of Jerusalem. And since it's a little bit of a lengthy passage, we don't have time to read all of it. We'll just read a bit of it. But basically, what happens is at the end of chapter 4, the wall's mostly finished. It's not quite 100% done, but it's starting to look pretty good. Things are going good. They got rid of their threats of those two men, Tobiah and Shalamit, I believe. And now what we have is the officials. And you can see this in verse 1. The officials and the nobles, in other words, the leaders of Jerusalem, the rich, they are taxing interest on their poorer brothers in order to take their land. They are taxing them so high that they can't pay back the interest, so they say, well, now you'll have to be a servant in order to pay it off. Or, well, then you're going to have to give me your field in order to pay it off. And all the people, well, all the poor people, it says there's a great outcry amongst the Jews. And they come to Nehemiah and say, you got to fix this. This is terrible. We're in slavery. Our children are in slavery because we borrowed money, and they're taxing such high interest. And I think it's exactly what you described, Al, in their good times. The nobles and the officials no longer they're starting to get a wall. You know, they're in a routine. That things are going good. The wall's being rebuilt. They don't have to worry about the threat anymore because Nehemiah spurred them on, and they keep going. And so they kind of get an opportunity to think, well, maybe I can make some money now. You know, things are going good. If things are going good, they can be even better. How about I get some more money for myself? How about I get some more land for myself and more servants for myself? And that's exactly how we can be in good times. But let's note in verse 8. Verse 8. Look at what Nehemiah does. Verse 8. And he said to them, we, as far as we are able, have brought back our Jewish brothers who have been sold to the nations, but you even sell your brothers that they may be sold to us. They were silent and could not find a word to say. So I said, the thing that you are doing is not good. Ought you not to walk in the fear of our God to prevent the taunts of the nations our enemies? Moreover, I and my brothers and my servants are lending them money and grain. Let us abandon this exacting of interest. Return to them this day their fields, their vineyards, their olive orchards, and their houses, and the percentage of money, grain, wine, and oil that you have been exacting from them. Verse 12. Then they said, we will restore these and require nothing from them. We will do as you said. And I called the priests and made them swear to do as they had promised. And I also shook out the fold of my garment and said, so may God shake out every man from his house and from his labor who does not keep this promise. So may he be shaken out and emptied. And all the assembly said, amen, and praised the Lord. And the people did as they had promised. So what does Nehemiah do in this situation? Does he just let it happen? Or does he take action? He confronts them. Wow, Adam, you got the exact word I was looking for. He confronts them, right? And he doesn't have to be violent. He doesn't have to curse them. Really, all he had to do was just say, what is going on? What are you doing? And make them look at what they were doing for them to realize, oh, wow, we've messed up. But, yes, Mr. Al.
He confronts them with the fear of the Lord.
He does. He says, how can you do this before God? We should be walking in the fear of God. Yes, ma'am.
Well, I have a question. Are these fellow Jews that are doing this?
Yes, ma'am. They're the leaders of Jerusalem, and we can know this because when Nehemiah addresses them, he says, "We have brought back our Jewish brothers." Like you're doing this to our brothers, and we know Nehemiah is a Jew, and so if he's calling them our Jewish brothers, then they must be Jewish as well, which is what makes it all the worse, right? It's not another nation taking advantage of them; it's them taking advantage of themselves. But let me ask you, for our current context, we know confrontation is hard, right? That's no mystery. I don't need to ask if it's hard. But what makes confrontation hard? And additionally, what can we do to make confrontation easier or better? Very good. Most confrontation lacks humility, which is what makes it difficult. And I'm going to imply that if we have humility, it will be a lot better. Very good. On both sides, both being confronted and confronting. Very good. Right. Okay. So what makes it so difficult is the risk of it getting farther apart. That could be difficult, especially if one side or the other is not willing to come together. Very good. Love? Oh, okay. Very good. One way which we've been talking about so far is pray, right? And pray that God speaks through us so that we say what we really should be said. Very good. So let's switch to the other side. What if we're confronted? Because inevitably, even in my short life, I've been confronted. It happens, right? We mess up and we're going to be confronted. So how can we, when we're being confronted, do it well? Yes, sir.
It is a matter of the heart.
Mm-hmm.
I'm hearing humility. If we have the heart to want to please God, whether we on the confronting or the being confronted, if the word of God and the desire is for Him, then that's what's going to make it be well. If there's a problem with the heart, then you're going to have problems with the confrontation.
Okay, very good. Yeah, if we got to make sure our heart's in the right place, that we want to, as Nehemiah said, walk in the fear of the Lord, right? So when we're being confronted, that we acknowledge that and that we're willing to do whatever we need to fix to get back into that right relationship. Very good. Anything else to add? Very good. So let's finish this point with this question, same as the last. Let's ignore the what are some temptations and struggles in the good times. Let's just focus on how can we persevere through good times, especially from what Nehemiah said or did.
It seems that the theme holds up through the whole thing. Prayer.
Prayer.
Stay with it through all the challenges that they all came up.
Yeah, and I think that probably points to how important prayer should be in our life, that it's applicable for every situation. Very good. Adam. Okay. Yeah. Very good. And I think that's something these officials struggled with, is they thought, we rebuilt the wall, right? We're the ones who worked with Nehemiah, so we deserve the praise. We should even get some money out of this. Very good. But if they would have pointed to God like Nehemiah always did, that wouldn't have been an issue. Very good. Anything else? Thanksgiving. I think that's perfect. When we're thankful, honestly, when we're thankful, we're going to remember that it's not us who did it, and it's not about us, it's about God. Very good. So let's continue with just our last time, I guess, or event that we need to persevere through, and that is change. Now, change, in my opinion, is one of the hardest parts of life. For some of us, my wife works through change very well. She moved tons of times when she was a kid, so she's fine with change, things like that. Me, I lived in the same house for about 15 years till I moved and left for college. I never moved. I went to the same church every Sunday, had the same friends, went to all the same schools. They were all within 2 miles of each other. Change is not really my thing so much. So it can be difficult. And there's change at a certain level that's going to be difficult for whomever you are. But how is change hard? Or maybe better phrase, why is change so hard?
It gets you out of your comfort zone.
Yeah, I think that's at the core of it, right? It gets us out of our comfort zone. Even if it's a change for the better, it's difficult. Anything else?
The uncertainty.
Yes, that's probably the other side. I think those two, the comfort zone and then the uncertainty of if it's going to be good or not. It may not be good, but it may be great. And humans, I think more than anything, hate not knowing what's going to happen, right? Other than maybe in movies. So let's, though it's not in Nehemiah, just one book back, he was a contemporary of Nehemiah. Let's hop to Ezra chapter 3. Now Nehemiah kind of was the practical leader, and Ezra was more the spiritual leader. Ezra, though Nehemiah did point people to God, he was more in the trenches and things like that. I would say Ezra was more like the priest, right? And so they worked together at the same time, both trying to rebuild. However, right now what we're talking about is rebuilding the temple, which had been also destroyed, completely destroyed, when the Babylonians came and destroyed all the rest of Jerusalem. So in Ezra 3, verses 12 through 13, but many of the older priests and Levites and family heads who had seen the former temple wept aloud when they saw the foundation of this temple being laid. While many others shouted for joy, no one could distinguish the shouts from the sound of the shouts of joy from the sound of weeping, because the people made so much noise, and the sound was heard far away. So, in this, so it's supposed to be a pretty big deal, right? They're laying down the foundation for the temple. That's a huge significance for your rebuilding, right? As was mentioned, this was God's city. This is where God dwelt, but the temple was destroyed. So now you're rededicating Jerusalem back, but a lot of the people, mostly the older people who had seen the old temple, which was Solomon's temple, wept, because this new temple wasn't even as close to as nice. In my research, what is estimated was spent on Solomon's temple, which is no longer here, is destroyed, was $5 to $8 billion is what was estimated was spent on that temple because of everything was laid in gold, all the labor, all the precious stones, everything. $5 to $8 billion. So how on earth could, and they're rebuilding, how on earth are they supposed to get $5 to $8 billion to make a temple the same? But God, well, we'll talk about that. I shouldn't say that yet. Let's ask this question. Why were people so sad? I mean, not only were they just like kind of disappointed, they were weeping so loud that you couldn't tell who was shouting for joy and who was weeping. Why were they so upset about this new temple? It did not meet their expectations. Very good.
Well, I think also the contrast.
The contrast.
Then that really brings to their thoughts how great it was and how they let it fall into disrepair.
Yes, exactly. And, the expectations, yeah, that's a hard part of change, right? We might expect something to be really great, and it's not. It's still good, but it's not as great, and it makes us sad. But never mind. It didn't match with the old one. But here's a little secret that they should have known about. They did know about. There was many times in the history of Israel, especially in the time of the kings and 2 Kings, where this temple was abandoned. Because they were worshiping so many other idols, it was abandoned. In the time of Josiah, they went exploring, spelunking in this temple that was not dilapidated, but it was abandoned, and they found the book of the law for the first time, and Josiah heard it for the first time. And so he tore his clothes and made a bunch of reforms, but there was no one in that temple. So yeah, it was $5 to $8 billion, but it was just sitting there. It wasn't being used at all. But the people don't remember that. They just remember, this is not as big as that temple. This is not as nice as that temple was. This is a mess of a temple. And it got so bad that God in Haggai, one of the prophets, actually had to talk to them. Now, this Haggai did speak years later after Nehemiah. It wasn't exactly. But it's because what they did in their rebuilding is they just built the temple, the foundation, and that's it. They left it for like 20 years, nearly 2 decades. They just left. They built the foundation, cried about it, and then left it. And so, which brings us to Haggai, chapter 2, verses 1 through 3. And Haggai, Lord said through Haggai, on the 21st day of the 7th month, the word of the Lord came through the prophet Haggai. Speak to Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, governor of Judah, to Joshua, son of Jozadak, the high priest, and to the remnant of the people. Ask them, who of you is left who saw this house in its former glory? How does it look to you now? Does it seem to you like nothing? So he's saying, are you really saying this temple is nothing just because it's not as nice as the other one? What's important about the temple? It's where God lives. That's what's important. That's where the value is. It's just a nice building otherwise. And so he's saying, just because it doesn't have the same gold, just because it doesn't have the same stones, are you really going to forsake this temple? You're really not going to make it? And that's another way, unfortunately, a negative example is the people did not persevere in their building of the temple. They just laid the foundation and let discouragement sit in, or maybe they rode the emotional high of, wow, we laid the temple but didn't do anything, and they just let it sit. They didn't persevere through the change, some of them because of sadness, and some of them because they were so excited about the change, I suppose. It's hard to read into everyone's motivations. But that brings us to one of our final questions. What are some things, I didn't want to say what are some things we weep and mourn like the Israelites, but what are some things that maybe were in the past that we feel aren't as good. And I want us to specifically focus on maybe in the church body. What are some things that back when were just so much better?
Well, growing up, everybody just about knew what a fa and a re and a do and a mi, and now you just have a few folks. And know that, so it's good to God, but the harmonics, and I always say, a drawing card to others is these folks can sing, and they own key.
So you believe, do you believe it's because of not as many workshops, or what do you think's come to that?
I don't think we don't spend as much time in the fa's and the re's and the do's and the mi's to know. It's just like reading the Word of God. We don't spend as much time.
Yeah.
That's just when you don't take the time to know about them, it's gonna go lacking a little bit.
Very good. Yeah. So just not to try and put it in a box, but just to sum it up, like the singing, you believe once upon a time was better. And I agree with you. With all the distractions we have now, we don't spend as much time on individual things. We try and do a whole bunch of things a little bit at a time. Very good. An example for me is when I was a kid in the youth group, we had a huge youth group. It was nearly 50 kids in a congregation of about 300. So there was a lot of us. Now, and this isn't due to anything wrong that happened, it's just a lot of us aged out and graduated, and there wasn't as many kids coming up. And so now the youth group at my home congregation in Colorado is about 10 or 8. And at times that can be discouraging for me. Is there anything else?
But we could let some of the stuff in the past be discouraging. But I love what the Bible says. There's 2 or 3, and that keeps me personally. You ain't got to worry about it. You got a whole lot that's beautiful, but if there's 2 or 3, then the Lord is in the mix.
Very good. I agree. I think that's encouraging. And that's another one. It's just, from what I understand, just the numbers in churches. I've seen a lot in especially West Texas around Lubbock. Since those communities are dying, a lot of the churches have gone from 200 people to 10, over 50 years. And that can also be discouraging. But as I've asked for every one of our points one last time, how can we persevere through change? And I'll go ahead and say the obvious one, prayer. I believe that's exceptionally obvious. We need to pray and trust in God. But how else can we persevere through change?
Keep bringing these little ones to church. We'll keep it all going.
Yes, exactly. Teach our children and our grandchildren.
The rock and roll song, teach the children well.
Teach the children well. Very good. Exactly. Any other ways that we can persevere through change? Yeah. Excellent. Remember that this is not our home, and we're transients anyway. Very good. Very good. And I would add 2, just so we can wrap up. Remember that nostalgia can oftentimes make things seem a lot better than they were. We can say, well, the church was way better in the 2000s, right? And we just remember fondly. The human brain has a great way of remembering the good times. We don't remember the bad things that came with it, right? Well, I can remember maybe the youth group was huge, but what if many of those aren't faithful now, but all 10 that are there are exceptionally faithful, right? So remember that nostalgia can sometimes cloud our judgment. And then 2, obviously, just trust God that whatever change happens, whether it's fun or not, will be for His glory. Well, very good. So, one of the hardest parts in life is perseverance. It's easy to go up one step. It's hard to go up 5 flights of stairs, right? It's easy maybe to run 20 feet as opposed to 20 miles. And most importantly, it's easy to be a Christian for one day. That's no problem. We could do that. But what about a lifetime? Following Jesus is hard. And trying to do it for a lifetime is hard. And rebuilding, it's easy to put one brick down. But what about building a whole wall around a city? Very difficult. Perseverance is hard, but I believe it's one of the most crucial things in rebuilding. We have to persevere. We can't be like the Israelites and just lay down the foundation and say that's good enough, right? We can't build a 2-foot wall. That's not going to help anything. We got to keep going. We got to persevere. And I want to leave you, I want to finish with the words of the Hebrew writer in Hebrews chapter 12, verse 1. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance with the race marked out for us. May we all run with perseverance and rebuild with perseverance. Thank you.
Lovely, and you could